Okay, good morning, members. Nice to see such a full chamber. Is something happening this morning? Okay, my name is Councillor Cheryl Carlisle and I'm the Chair of the Finance and Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can I welcome everyone to the meeting, which is a multi-location meeting. The meeting will be live streamed and recorded and will be available for viewing after the meeting. Should the live streaming fail, the meeting will continue and the recording will be available through the Council's website following the conclusion of the meeting. Can I remind members that translation facilities are available and for those attending remotely to choose your language of choice. For those wishing to speak in the chamber, please raise your hand. Those attending remotely, please use the raised hand function. We will alternate between speakers in the chamber and remote attendees. For those attending remotely, please note that those in the chamber will be unable to use the chat facility. So please, can you make any points clear that you're putting in the chat? Thank you. Committee members who are attending remotely are required to leave their camera on throughout the debate and when voting in order to maintain the integrity of the decision-making process. If you do need to leave the meeting temporarily, pop a message in the chat function so the Democratic Services Officer is aware and then let us know when you return. I expect everyone present and participating in this meeting to conduct themselves appropriately and be respectful to each other. That applies to members, officers and anyone in the public gallery. When I open up the debate to members, I will ask committee members to speak and put their questions first, followed by non-committee members. Whilst I do not wish to stifle debate, can I remind members that any questions should be focused on the subject matter and to avoid repetition. If I feel the length of individual speeches are negatively impacting on the overall time for discussion and becoming unmanageable, I will defer to the committee's rules of procedure, which limits the length of speeches to 5 minutes. Can I remind members that there are exempt items on the agenda today and you should be the only person able to hear any confidential and exempt items being discussed. So we'll move on to the agenda. This morning we're going to discuss important budgetary issues, so it will take as long as it takes. I'm sure you'll all be delighted to know that. We'll start with item 1, apologies for absence, please, Dawn.
I have none, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. Declarations of interest, please, members. Councillor Harry.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'm conscious there's significant reference to homeschool transport in item 9.1, which is the revenue budget 2023-2024. My mother-in-law has an interest and another family member is a manager of one of Conway's largest homeschool transport operators. I'm conscious the report isn't focused solely on homeschool transport, so what I'll do if the Deputy Monitoring Officer is happy with this is I'll perhaps reference it now, and if we get into any in-depth discussion, I'll leave the meeting completely prejudicial interest, if you're happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, you're declaring it for the interest of transparency, but if the matter becomes a matter of debate, yes, that's fine.
Fantastic, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harry. Thank you, Kerry. Councillor Gareth.
I'm chair of Chraffu Conwy, and there are references in the paper, obviously, to the homeless budget and things. And Chraffu Conwy does play some part in the homelessness issue, so I would just like to have it noted for transparency, because I don't think there's anything prejudicial in there at the moment.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gareth. And also, we Cabinet members will need to declare an interest in agenda item 12, and the committee will need to agree that they can remain in the meeting to listen to the debate. So we will deal with that later. There's also an issue there in terms of the call-in as well. There may be an interest in there, which we will discuss when we get to that point. Okay, thank you, members. No one else with any interest? No. Okay. We move on to item 3, urgent matters. Not aware of any urgent matters. Okay. Item 4, minutes. To approve and sign as a correct record minutes of the previous meeting, 3rd of July 2023, pages 4 to 11. Could I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Gareth and Councillor Paul, thank you very much. Could you show, please, members? Thank you very much. Those are passed. Everybody online? Yeah, lovely, thank you. Anyone against? No. Lovely, thank you. Okay, item 5, the minutes of the informal meeting of Overview and Scrutiny Committee chairs and vice chairs. This is to note the minutes of the meeting held on 3rd of July, 23 pages 12 to 15. You can indeed.
Can I bring members' attention to minute 8, when the chairs and vice chairs discussed the updates from the North Wales Economic Ambition Board? It was suggested that the programme manager from the North Wales Economic Ambition Board be invited to the Member Development and Information Forum rather than coming here on an annual basis. Obviously subject to the chair's approval, which is Councillor Harry. Whilst Councillor Harry is happy for the chair to come to give an overview of the programme, he did have some concerns regarding the role of the member development in monitoring the programme. So it's obviously a matter for members to decide where they want that to go.
Could we have some thoughts on that, please, members? You can indeed read.
Sorry, I'm swapping chairs here because I have no microphone. I think the committee has a function in terms of scrutiny for the AB. So I do think there needs to be a report that comes to this committee so that we are dealing with the scrutiny function that this committee gives. The member development is fine. If you want a general overview in member development, that's more than fine, isn't it? You know, and actually might give a little bit of a freer conversation around different things, but there will need to be a specific item that comes to scrutiny to fulfill that scrutiny function of the EAB. There will be discussions down the line with CJCs as well around how that's scrutinized. So I think we need to be careful around that. So I would suggest that we still need it to come to this committee.
Thank you very much, Reen. First hand up was Councillor Anne online, then Councillors Gareth and Harry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I agree completely with Reen. I think public scrutiny of the Economic Ambition Board is a key role for us. So if we need to propose it, I'm happy to propose that. So simple as that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Anne. Councillor Gareth next, please.
I was just going to suggest that maybe they came to the member development first to give people a proper understanding and a general discussion around it, and it might actually make the scrutiny a bit more pointed and relevant, and we can just hit the proper points there.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harry, are you happy with that?
With Gareth's suggestion of Reen's.
Both. Well, Councillor has proposed that a report comes here as well.
Yeah, look, so I think Reen probably hit my thoughts exactly on the head. It's a significant amount of public money involved within the growth deal and the Economic Ambition Board. It's right that it comes in. It's right that these matters are scrutinised publicly and not in a closed informal session. However important member development is, we've agreed that a representative from the Economic Ambition Board will come to member development to give members that informal overview, but the regular monitoring should come here. That is my opinion as the chair for member development and information forum, and I've made that very clear to officers and yourself, Chair. And I'd be very uncomfortable with those regular reports coming to what is ultimately a closed informal forum.
Thank you, Councillor Harry. So have we a seconder for Councillor Anne's proposal? Councillor Harry, lovely. Well, if members would like to show on that, please. That's unanimous. Thank you. So that's carried. Thank you very much. Okay. And obviously the minutes as well. Are we all happy as well as that proposal? Minutes? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, members. We now move on to item 6. Minutes of the Conway Opportunities Board. The minutes were held on the 22nd of June 2023, the meeting, pages 16 to 17. Could I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Anyone? Thank you very much. Councillors Gareth proposed it, Councillor Harry seconded it. Would everyone like to show in favour, please? Thank you. Anyone against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much. Item 7, question to Cabinet members. There are none. They will be relieved to hear. So we move on to item 8, the forward work programme. Dawn is going to go over that, and then I have an addition for that as well. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. So there's been quite a few changes to the forward plan since it was last presented. So due to the amount of reports coming through, the Chair and Vice Chair have reviewed the forward plan and agreed that a special meeting will be held on the 30th of August, which is a week on Wednesday. And that will be to consider the capital programme, monitoring quarter one monitoring report and the business planning framework. And then they reviewed the agenda for the September meeting, and that has been revised and will include the following reports, which is the notice of motion in relation to park areas, 3G pitch, feedback from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and the establishment of an office accommodation project board. And then the following reports have been deferred to October, which is the hybrid working policy, the Welsh promotion strategy, and end of project report for the Workwise project. That's my update, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Dawn. And I would also like to propose an addition to the forward work programme, that we invite the Chief Fire Officer to come to the next meeting, the next available meeting, to discuss all their budgetary issues that are going to have a big impact on Conway. Very concerning matter. They didn't come last year, if I'm correct, Reen. And so I think they really need to come and explain the nature of any proposed rises. I know that we have members on the Fire Authority, but we really need to hear it from the Chief Officer. So thank you. Councillor Dilwyn, would you like to answer that?
Yes, I agree entirely with what you've said, Carol, and something else which I have raised, and I think it should be considered as a whole, not necessarily part of that, is as we all know, it's not stated on our council tax bill exactly how much we pay to the fire authority. It's a considerable amount, and I think we should find a way somehow of stating that somewhere on the bill, so that our people out there know that that money is going to the fire authority and it's not actually coming to the council's funds. I don't know if anybody agrees with that.
Thank you very much for that. Good point, Councillor. Amanda, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I totally sympathise, Councillor Dilwyn, with your view there. The only problem that we do have is that ultimately the Fire Authority is not a precepting body. So on the actual bill itself, we are only able to list the precepting authority. So that's ourselves, the Community Council and the police. That doesn't mean, though, that we can't, around the bill itself, explicitly put information. So we can seek to do that, certainly.
That's really helpful, Amanda. Thank you very much. Councillor Gareth.
Also, there's a lot of talk in the peer review about the communications, and that is part of that communications. Is it making clear to everybody as to how much is actually going on these services, and also maybe pointing out how much actually they've gone up and the increases, so people can put them into context.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Gareth. Got Councillor Chris online.
Thank you, Chair. Taking on board what Amanda just said about the Fire Authority not being a precepting authority, I'm conscious that this has been something which has been discussed at the Fire Authority, and I wonder whether there is any scope for local authorities across North Wales to raise the issue with the Fire Authority, see if there is a consensus that can be reached, and perhaps put a proposal to the WLGA if there is a consensus on that issue, and that perhaps Fire Authorities should become precepting authorities in their own right.
Thank you, Councillor Chris. Another good suggestion. We shall take all those issues forward. Okay, so have we a proposer and a seconder for those for the additions to the changes and additions to the forward work plan? Councillor Harry and Councillor Paul seconding. Thank you. If members would like to show now. and unanimous online as well. Thank you very much, members. That's carried. We now move on to item 9A, the revenue budget 23-24, the Q1 monitoring report. These are pages 69 to 81. Councillor Mike is going to come in and introduce the report. Can I just ask before we start, you will note that Appendix 1 only arrived on Friday. I hope you've all had you've all been able to study the appendix that came with the report. So thank you very much, members. Councillor Mike.
Yeah, apologies for the lateness of Appendix 1, Chair. This is the, just as I say, introduce, and then I'll hand over to our Strategic Director of Finance, Amanda Hughes. Revenue budget for 23-24 Q1 monitoring report. This report indicates that we are already facing a significant budgetary pressure in this current financial year as a result of continued pay and price inflationary pressures, rising interest rates and other increasing demands on our services. We all know that our reserves are limited and that we need to maintain these as best we can to assist us with future financial resilience. I won't go too much into the reserves because I think the next report goes into more detail about our reserves and a policy that we need to agree on going forward. So part of this report is asking members also to support an instruction to our services once again to slow and pause expenditure in year to curb and contain what I have to say is a bleak forecast. It's also essential that those services facing specific pressures seek to take corrective action to control their budgets this year. Appendix 1 reflects on the projected outturn overspend of just under £3 million across our services. The figure given is at 2.993 million. However, in addition to the position outlined in paragraph 3.3, there are a number of other budgetary pressures that we need to be cited on, which may have a significant impact on the outturn position and increase the estimated funding shortfall to just under £5.5 million. As I've said, the pressures that we're facing are pay awards, teachers and NJC. NJC are our local government staff. And I'm sure Amanda will go into the issues that we may have. We haven't included the pressures of NJC staff, and that could put again significant pressure on the projected shortfall of 5,434 million. So the pressures there we're looking at is the pay awards, again totally out of our control. These are agreed nationally. Home to school transport is concerning us. Social care fees is also a concern. Housing and homelessness continues to put pressure on the budget, and rising interest rates and a stubbornly high inflation pressures. I was going to hand over there to Amanda, but I just would like to just make a comment on the fire service, and they're out to consultation at the moment on free options. I will say that I have looked at the costing of them options, and roughly I could say option 1 could possibly cost us around an extra £600,000 a year. Option 2 could cost us around £800,000 a year extra, and option 3 would cost Conway an extra £1 million. And you're absolutely right, that will be an increase in our budget, which ultimately may be paid for by council tax. I will say now a 1% increase in council tax will bring in the equivalent of about £635,000. So I'm just putting that into prospect. And basically, you know, I welcome that if the fire service come here, because I'd like to talk to them about what reserves they have. I'd like to ask them how they've implemented a new treasury management system, and I'd like to know what the costs of all that are. And I know they're doing their own procurement. These are services that we used to work in partnership with, and we used to do these and provide that service to the fire service. So I'd be interested in what the cost of was when we were providing the service for them, and what the cost is now for them providing the service for themselves. I wasn't going to say anything about that, but when I heard colleagues talking about the fire service, it is going to put pressure on our budget. I'm not anti-fire service. but I need to explain to the people of Conway what their council tax goes on, and a significant part of the council tax goes to pay for the fire authority. Chair, if I could hand over to our strategic director to go through the report in more detail.
Thank you, Councillor Mike. And some of those points will be going, I'm sure, in our letter to the fire authority, asking what we want the chief fire officer to cover, because the treasury management, you know, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. Why have they set up something that I presume will be more expensive? So
Wait for the answer, and if those points have been captured in the minutes, more than happy for them to go forward as questions, Chair. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Councillor Mike. Amanda.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mike, for the introduction of the report. So I won't reiterate what Mike said. He took you through most of the points really, but just to draw your attention to a couple of specific things. As you'll be aware, effectively every quarter we undertake an exercise with services to look at what the projected outturn for service spend is, and that is what's reflected in Appendix 1, and that identifies, as Mike said, a handful of key pressures. Most services, in fairness to them, are predicting to be within budget, but there are three key pressures from services: home to school transport, homelessness, and a smaller pressure in social care, and in interest rates being the other big issue. Obviously, interest rates, if you'll recall, when we set the budget, I think they were anticipating that interest rates would peak at around 4.5%. Obviously, they've continued to go further than that and are now anticipated to peak at 5.5%, with some commentators even possibly suggesting they might go slightly higher than that as well. So, and the pace of the speed at which they're going to come back down is now being pushed much further out, probably actually until the end of 2026, before they come down to around, or they anticipate to come down to around 3%. So they're the pressures that are effectively coming through from our routine spend and are known about in terms of, or certain, oh sorry, not certain, but known about in terms of the activity. Table 1 then sets out some other pressures which have not yet been crystallized, for want of a better phrase. So the teachers' pay award has not yet officially been settled. We know in England it's been settled at 6.5%, but it's not yet firmly settled in Wales. But on the assumption it does get settled at 6.5%, then that will add a further in-year pressure to us of 521,000. We budgeted at 5%. Obviously, the full year cost of that next year will be up towards £1 million, but the in-year pressure would be about 500,000. There's pressure coming in relation to care costs, and the committee will be considering a paper later on the agenda in relation to that. I think energy, we had hoped when we set the budget that prices were starting to come down a little and that we would see the benefit of that. So we adjusted downwards slightly the business case that had been put in for the rise in energy costs. It doesn't look, however, that that reduction will necessarily be achieved, and therefore the original business case was probably more realistic. So that's adding a pressure on. And we also, as part of the overall setting the budget, put in an amount of grant income to be identified. So at this stage, that's yet still to be identified, notwithstanding that I am hopeful that some of that will come through. But the big other pressure then that hasn't been taken account in the 5.4 million is the NJC pay award. So members will be recall that just before we set the budget last year, the pay offer was made, and the pay offer was essentially equivalent to last year's pay offer, which was that every single scale point would receive a cash increase of £1,925. That actually, for us, worked out at an average of about 6.5%, and we budgeted for 6%. So right at the very last minute, you'll recall that members, in setting the budget, agreed to fund that difference of about 700,000 from reserves. So that's in the budget. So we have the pay offer in the budget. All of the unions in relation, there are 3 relevant unions for local government staff. All of those unions rejected the pay offer and have balloted their members about strike action. We are awaiting those national results. So all of the ballots have now closed, but the national position is not yet known. It's slightly complex because you can have local strikes rather than a sort of a national strike. But to get a local strike, you have to, obviously everyone has to vote in favour of the strike action, but more importantly as well, at least 50% of those eligible to vote have to vote. So, for instance, we do know here in Conwy that whilst staff have voted to strike, the 50% wasn't reached, and therefore there will be no strike action in Conwy. But we don't know yet what the national position is, and obviously, depending upon the national position, that will dictate the strength of the bargaining position of those unions. So at the moment, I'm still assuming that it'll be settled at the pay offer. But if it isn't and it does go up, then that will add further pressure. And I've modelled what it would be if, say, the 1925 were increased to 2,200 per person, and that would cost about a bit over another £1 million. So the 5.4 million is a best estimate of the pressure at this stage, but as I say, it is one that could worsen. The other thing I wanted to draw to your attention, and included within the pressures that have been identified so far, is that in Appendix 2, I've set out all of the savings that were included in the budget. You'll recall that when the budget was approved, members approved the inclusion of 11.569 million of budget savings, and Appendix 2 sets out the perspective in terms of whether they're going to be achieved or not. This report, or this particular aspect of the report, we reintroduced at the end of last year. I think pre the pandemic, there was monitoring of the savings position. It sort of fell by the wayside a little bit during COVID, and we've reintroduced it now. You'll also be aware, if you've had a chance to read the peer review report, that also was one of the things that they were keen that we made sure that we reinstated. So on that basis, Appendix 2 sets out that position. And on a positive note, services are anticipating that 10 million of those savings will be achieved, and are hopeful of achieving those. But there is a shortfall or an expected non-achievement of around 1.5 million, which is obviously of concern because if that's not achieved, then that is adding that pressure, and effectively that 1.5 million non-achievement is contained within that 5.5 million projected overspend. I think, in fairness, some of them services are hoping to find alternative savings. So particularly the savings that ERF and don't feel they're able to achieve, they're hopeful of finding alternative savings. Obviously, in terms of homelessness, there was a 576,000 included for homelessness. That's a difficult one. There's certainly a tremendous amount of activity going on across the authority to address a whole host of options for bringing housing back into use in order to try and drive down that homelessness spend. But clearly, it takes time, and whilst I think with those savings they may not be achieved in the current year, certainly one would hope in future years, as that intense activity that we're undertaking comes into fruition, that we'll see those savings coming through. So they're not savings that won't be achieved in the longer term. They're probably more savings that are just going to struggle to be made in the current financial year. So I wanted to draw that to your attention. And then just moving then effectively to what happens if we can't contain that 5.4 million overspend. I've set out in table 2 the level of reserves that we currently have, in particular the reserves that are there to support the revenue budget. Capital reserves have got restrictions on them and can't really be used for revenue purposes. So I've just set out in this table the revenue reserves. So effectively, we have, including general balances, of £35.5 million of revenue reserves. We've already committed, as I discussed earlier, 720 for that pay pressure, and of those reserves, 10.3 million of them belong to the schools. So therefore, effectively, we have remaining 24.5 million of our reserves, including every other reserve, so including all of our service reserves, including our insurance reserves, etc., etc. So all of our reserves absolutely in total are 24.5 million. I've set out in the lower half of that table those which are effectively earmarked for specific purposes, but are earmarked either for budget recovery, for pay pressures, or our general balances. And you can see there that those 3 reserves add to £11 million, which is just 4% of our net revenue budget. So you can see certainly that if we were to not be able to contain that 5.5 million and it fell on balances, that we would effectively be wiping out 50% of the balances that we have spare to support our budget. And given that we're heading into a significantly difficult financial year next year, where we simplistically know that the settlement is going to be increasing by just 3%, yet we know already that our costs are rising by 6 or 7%. So clearly the settlement is not going to be adequate to fund our pressures for next year. So with that in mind, therefore, that is why I guess I'm recommending that members support an instruction to all services to slow and pause expenditure, because ultimately we have to try and bring that back in. We're early enough in the year that we can take proactive action to contain that overspend and to protect our balances, which will allow us a greater level of resilience going into the following year. I would suggest that maybe you might consider me to be using strong language, but I would suggest that if we don't seek to take corrective action now, that would be being reckless and not sensible in the context of decent budget management. So that's why I'm asking, or Mike's asking, that that's supported. I think probably that's all I want to say.
Thank you very much for that indeed, Amanda. Difficult message for everyone. Okay, members, we've got 30 minutes for questions. So please, can you all marshal your thoughts and your questions and ask them in one group, and please don't repeat what others have already said. So we'll start with Councillor Paul.
The facts are sobering in today's report and must lead us to some hard conclusions. I'd like to suggest respectfully, we are individually and collectively responsible for not thinking and acting quick enough in deciding what Conway should be doing in 2023. Obviously, some of those things we have no control over, but it seems to me, even this early in this financial year, that we did not make sufficient cuts and savings and or increases in charges and council taxes in March this year. And now we will need to make further cuts and savings in this year because of inflation and because of the demand for our services. And I think we need to sometimes also focus on some of the detail of this in terms its impact later in the agenda, so I won't cover it now. we're looking at the struggle to fund adults and older people and children looked after in their care placements. But I would like to just focus, so we don't lose touch, on a couple of local issues which sort of identify for me where we're not being quick and able enough. I've said since I was elected in May last year that it remains an absolute nonsense that we have three primary schools on the same site in Abergele, with all the on costs of 3 head teachers, 3 governing bodies, lots of infrastructure supporting 3 separate primary schools. And we are still resisting making a decision on amalgamating those schools. So I'm not asking other councillors in other wards to address these things. There's an issue in my ward that we should be addressing and we're not addressing. And in the present context, we're also struggling with the legacy of closing the old school and the head teacher's house, which was closed over 50 years ago and has been a drain on our resources ever since. We have decided to take full responsibility for this. We've taken responsibility to close that old school building and the head teacher's house and its access to the community this September, which isn't popular. We also chose not to consult on that closure because I'll take responsibility for that as well, because the thought was any further consultations or delays meant we'd save even less. So it seems to me it's those sort of issues we need to address. I'll give you one other example locally, which to me, again, is a complete nonsense. We agreed to make savings around public conveniences, and part of that was handing public conveniences to town and community councils. We spent 150,000 as Conway to do up one of our public conveniences in Conway, £150,000. That was finished in December this year. And this was to accrue savings in previous financial years. There were delays on this as it was. That public convenience, which we spent £150,000 on, is still not open. It was finished in December. It lays there now vandalized. Only last week, I had the distressing experience of witnessing an elderly gentleman, and I assumed his wife or partner, who he was pushing in a manual wheelchair, trying to gain access to that toilet with his disabled key, which he couldn't. Now that, again, that's not a cut, but we've obviously got to, between the town council and the county council, find a way to presumably increase the town council precept, increase the council tax to pay for the running costs of opening that public convenience. Or we're honest with the population and say these public conveniences close. But we can't just continue to defer these hard decisions that we have to make. We've wasted £150,000 if we close it, but we've got to make these hard decisions. And I think we've got to make these hard decisions this month, next month, each month, all the way through this year. We can't just continually defer them.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. Have you got a recommendation in that? Because obviously we're being asked for recommendations. Is there something you want to recommend to Cabinet on the back of that?
No, on the back of that, Mike knows these issues and he will take these issues back. So I'm not criticising Mike personally about this, of course, but I think some of this detail does need to be taken back, and it does need further work on. I wasn't greatly impressed by the peer review report, but the one thing within it I was supportive of is that there should be a politically led transformation team, which we fund separately.
On our 5
I know, but I think that's the way to get some of these things sorted, because at the moment for whatever reasons, historically, we're not sorting these things out.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. We've got councillors Gareth, Harry, and then Councillor Anne online.
Thank you. I'll try and whip through my opinions and points as quickly as possible. As Amanda said, you know, on the plus side, we're early enough in the year to try and do something about it. On the negative side, it is really, really early in the year to be worked out that we're not actually hitting the budgets that were only set a short time ago. And my concern is that, you know, it's really early in the year to be asking departments to slow down and drag spend. Because, you know, by implication, that's only kicking the can down the road and there's no real detail. So I'd like to understand how they propose to slow down and drag the spend. Is it not paying suppliers? You know, if we pay them within 30 days, do we not pay them until 60 days, which then has an impact on, especially on the local businesses and things like that. We talk about recruitment drag, which again sounds great, but we've already seen sickness and well-being being affected within the council. So I'd like to understand, you know, how is that recruitment drag actually going to affect the well-being of the staff at the council? And whether it, you know, possibly it's a false economy to put staff under more pressure to do more work with actual less resources. On page 72, 3.11, we talk about £465,000 worth of grant money, which hasn't coming through. Now, you know, I'm trying to get my head around how is that a shortfall? Because with grants, I would guess that the rule should be no grants, no spend. So unless we've actually got the grant there, unless we're using it to provide statutory services, we shouldn't actually be spending it in anticipation and hope of actually having the grant income come in. And if that's been done, then, you know, there's a process to follow. I would guess we'd have to get authority to actually spend the money and then hope that we're going to get grant income. So I'd be interested. Again, my proposals or recommendations will depend on the answer to that. We look at 3.13 and the savings or the unachieved savings on the school transport. And I'm just wondering, you know, was that ever achievable when the budget was set, or was it just something that was thrown in there to try and balance the budgets out? And the other 2 points in there just kind of makes me think about Del Boy economics of next year, don't worry, we're going to balance the budgets. It's going to be coming down the line sometime. And with a projected shortfall of 5.4 million, how close are you, Amanda, to having to actually think about issuing that section 114 thing? Because my understanding is that it's unlawful for us to spend more than our income. And as councillors, we've actually got the duty, the equivalent of trustees. So we've got a fiduciary duty to actually make sure that the balance is the budget is balanced. And that if we're not putting credible, achievable budgets together, then that actually leaves us really vulnerable that we're not doing the right thing. You know, the warning signs are flashing. So we've got to do more than just note that things aren't actually going to plan. Within the revenue budgets under economy and culture, there seems to be with events, we've found, is it £308,000, and communications where 400 and odd, you know, almost the equivalent short. So I just wondered, you know, is that just an accounting thing? Do you want me to be specific on that, Amanda? So that, yeah, in the appendix there. So overall, it kind of looks okay, but just specifically within there. And to finish it all off, you know, we always go through something that's rarely challenged, which is talking about the future generation side of things. And there's a note in every report on that. But I think the truth is that, you know, we've already adversely affected possibly future generations by not being able to deliver the budget so far that was set in March. And, you know, I think we should actually note in that if we're taking these things seriously, we're putting them in, that we have affected them unless we can really, really turn it around. You know, part of me is hoping that this is worst case scenario and that, you know, we're all being frightened to actually do something the departments and everybody really been frightened to actually pull their finger out and actually achieve things, and that we've got a cunning plan to deliver a rabbit out of a hat before the end of the year and say, look, weren't we clever and astute, and we've dragged it all back. But, you know, I think we just need to take it really, really seriously as councillors. We've got a real duty to make sure that budgets are credible and achievable.
Thank you very much, that Gareth. Yes, I share, especially your first point, the impact of drag and spend. Each department is going to be affected differently. You know, heaven forbid, in social care, you don't pay a care home bill, you know, that kind of thing. What actually does it mean to each individual service, and where is the impact assessment on those? Yeah. So hospital pass, Amanda, please, can you go through Gareth's points? Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor Gareth, for those points, which actually are absolutely very valid and constructive. So, in terms, if I try and address them in order. So, in terms of the instruction, I think what we did last year was we very much relied on the judgment of heads of services around what was appropriate to slow and pause spend, and to a large extent that's also what we'll be doing this year. Having said that, I do think we are of the view that probably maybe we need to be a little bit more explicit in that, and certainly make sure that the messages promulgate down throughout the whole organisation, because I think maybe there was a little bit of a feeling last year that maybe it was that promulgation was slightly patchy. So we will be discussing next week at SLT what so senior leadership, strategic leadership team, around the firmness of some of those instructions, and whether we put some specific instructions in place about certain types of activity, and whether we maybe consider whether we have a recruitment freeze. Not that I'm proposing that at all. I don't think any of us propose that. For the very points that are being made, we absolutely are aware that lots of staff are under pressure, and lots of staff are dealing with critical service delivery for vulnerable residents, etc., and nobody for one moment is wanting to put that at risk. But that's not to say that we shouldn't have more challenge around some of the vacancies that we have, and whether actually it isn't then a matter of not filling a vacancy in order to just put more onto other people, but actually to review actually what our priorities are, and actually more explicitly direct about what work we're not doing because we're not replacing something. So I think there's that kind of thinking we've got to do, and also do we stop certain types of spend? Just picking a sort of an obvious but a sort of a low level one in a way, but do we, for argument's say, okay, we'll no longer attend conferences, or we won't do them, we'll only do them remotely, or there are certain things we can do to be much more explicit around using our funding to best effect to deliver those critical services for our residents. So we will be discussing that in detail, and agreeing the nature of some of those exact specific parts of the instruction, the general instruction, with Mike obviously as the portfolio holder. So and I think actually it comes back a little bit to the point Councillor Paul made, actually, is that there could be scenarios, couldn't they, where really in planning for the next financial year and the challenges of the next financial year, that doesn't necessarily stop us actually doing something in this financial year ahead of next financial year. We don't have to wait till next April to stop doing something if we're of the view that we should stop doing it to balance the budget next year. So that's a little bit around those. Moving on to the grant issue, we, in terms of the grant issue, the grant income, it wasn't, or I hope you don't think it was a reckless budget decision. I certainly don't think so. What what that was is that there is in some scenarios, and I mention in particular the Shared Prosperity Fund, there is opportunity for us to displace some existing spend against grant income coming in. So effectively it can be, and not just for that one, but for a number of grants, we are in a position sometimes where some of our existing activity is a legitimate match under the terms and conditions of the grant to that grant, and therefore rather than us incur new expenditure to deliver what's required under that grant, at the margins we can displace existing spend. So that's the that was why the budget was put into the budget, into the overall budget, was effectively about us gathering in small levels of displacement across a number of grants to make up that money. Now I am probably hopeful that we will get that 465 back, and therefore I'm being cautious and prudent in my forecast by including it as part of the overspend, because I haven't yet identified that. But work is currently underway with services to try and bring back those small elements of displacement. Just to assure you that we wouldn't be doing, I'm not suggesting we're doing anything untoward in terms of not meeting the grant conditions, and obviously the vast majority of the money would be spent on new activity, but it's just those little bits at the margins off each grant that we can bring and bring back to recover that money. So that's in relation to that one. In terms of section 114, I am confident that in the current financial year, there would be no reason for us, providing we can contain our overspend. I am confident that there'd be no reason for us to not, to have to issue a section 114, because we ultimately do have reserves, which are a legitimate income source to allow us to balance the budget. So as I've set out in table 2 in the report, we do have about, well, excluding schools, we do have about £25 million of reserves, and therefore if we were overspent by 5 million, then it could be funded from reserves, and therefore that would in the current year not require us to do a section 114 report. However, the whole point of wanting to contain the 5.5 and not use any of that reserves is therefore obviously to protect the level of reserves in order to avoid the need for section 114 in the next financial year, which I think is a more challenging ask. But yeah, in the current financial year, I believe there's sufficient income from reserves that would allow us to balance the budget, and therefore section 114 wouldn't be necessary. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the financial situation is still serious, and we need to obviously do our best to contain that overspend. I guess to the general point about the reasonableness of the estimate, as I say, I've tried to set out where the pressures are. I think in terms of the service pressures, they appear certain pressures really. There's a little bit of work I think to do on the home to school transport. Certainly at the moment, ERF and education are working closely together to analyse that predicted overspend, to understand where it's come from, I guess in the context of the business case that was in last year, and to be certain around that. So that one has perhaps a little bit less certainty to it than the others, but I think in terms of homelessness, those costs are the overspend predicted in terms of homelessness is effectively based on our current spending activity. So I think that one is probably fairly realistic. Interest charges are certainly realistic based on our forecast. The variation in the interest rate one a little bit is partly to do obviously with the time. We've obviously had to anticipate the timing of our future spend on our capital budgets. If the timing of that future spend were to differ, then that would slightly alter the interest rate forecast. But otherwise that one again is fairly certain. The teachers' pay award is fairly certain. The grants income maybe will pull back. and the care fee one possibly is certain as well. So I think I would hope I don't believe myself to be scaremongering. I believe that I've presented what I think is a fair estimate of where we could be heading based on reasonable assumptions. Obviously, if we take action now to slow and stall spend, then it will pull back. And so, you know, we may well, as we did last year, find that we don't overspend as much at the end of the year. But that would have been because, you know, that was last year we didn't overspend as much as we had predicted, but that was because we took proactive action to bring it back. You know, what I'm suggesting now is we do proactive action to bring it back again, and therefore the estimate I've given you is reasonable in that sense. Moving on, just specifically to that thing to do with economy and culture, I think. Councillor Gareth, I'd be able to give you more details if you wanted it, but I think there's just been some realignment of the budgets within the different section headings. So they're just environments within the overall existing budget. I think that's all that's happened with that. And in terms of future generations, I think that's a very valid point as well, actually, and something I've been considering quite closely, actually, in the context of capital and our future borrowing requirement, because I think you know, I think we have to, you know, we've got, or you as members know, have got a very difficult choice in some sense, haven't you? Because we can take decisions potentially which benefit us today, but have a negative impact on the future. And you know, I do think there is. I think we have a duty to ensure that the taxpayers who receive the services today pay for the services today, and the taxpayers who receive the services in the future pay for those services in the future. I think it's unfair. It's obviously unfair under WFG that, you know, that we would be burdening future taxpayers with costs from today by pushing them down the line. So I think we do have to be very careful around how we balance that short-term budget situation with the burden of on the future. So, you know, that's something certainly I've been thinking about quite closely recently, and I think, you know, there are some decisions, I think, when we come to set budgets, and particularly around capital, where you know, I'll be putting some of those dilemmas to you, really, because I think, you know, it's an absolutely critical thing that we've got to consider. So I hope Gareth, I covered everything. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks ever so much. Really comprehensive. And as you say, there's no need to go into come back to me with detail with that. If it is just a realignment of spends within the lines, then that's absolutely fine. So, you know, but I still think that we've got, as councillors, we've got a real duty to be specific about how we're going to drag this back. So I'd like to make a couple of recommendations, if that's okay.
Should we save the recommendations to the end?
Yeah, no problem.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because we've got 6 more speakers, 7, and we can deal with all the recommendations at the end in case some are similar. But that's great. Thank you, Councillor Gareth. Thank you, Amanda. Next, we go to Councillor Anne online and come back into Councillor Harry in the room, and then keep going down the line. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. If I'm being honest, I'm not particularly wanting to go into the detail here, because I think we're all shocked that, you know, allegedly 3 months into the year, although we're nearly halfway through the year in terms of spend, that we're in a real sticky wicket in terms of 5.5 million sort of overspend projection, which usually accelerates if we go year-on-year trends. So really, I've got a recommendation I'd like to make. So rather than take up anybody's time in terms of answering questions, I'm quite happy to go on to the next speaker in the short term. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you, Councillor Anne. I think that'll be the best way to deal with it. So Councillor Harry next, please, and then Councillor Andrew online after that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I had a couple of questions. First one was about the pause and slow of expenditure. I think that's probably largely been covered, but what I'd ask Amanda and Mike, I've really appreciated the additional detail you've given around that. But when you go away from this meeting, or perhaps from Cabinet, if that pause and slow is supported, and you talk to services, I'm conscious that the report does say it will perhaps have an impact on the delivery and quality of services provided. I don't think that surprises anyone, that's to be expected. But if we as members could be provided with a written update in due course, just so we can understand the impact of that pause and slow, I can't imagine it will involve all of our expenditure. I'd have thought there's a lot of things we can't pause. Staff wages, for example, that's something we can't pause. And I expect a large amount of our expenditure is on staffing costs. But otherwise, I really welcome what you've said around providing a very explicit instruction to services. It's the right thing to be doing. The other question I had was around this saving we're very unlikely to be able to achieve around the impact of the transitional accommodation capital programme. I can understand, obviously, we might budget for certain savings when we set our budget in March at the beginning of the financial year, and that some savings may not be fully delivered. I don't think that would surprise anyone, but I do find it astonishing that within 3 months we've gone from predicting a saving of over £500,000 to saying that we're now confident that saving will not be delivered at all. That frankly is bewildering. It says to me that either the saving was never going to be credible and should not have been in that budget in the first place, or that there may be some scope to still deliver that saving. So I'd like some more information on that. Why have we completely written off that saving? And if it is completely unachievable, why weren't we aware of this only 3 months previously when it's included in the budget?
Councillor Harry. Thanks, Amanda.
I'll try my best to answer that, but I may not be fully cited on all the answer. I think in terms of the, if you recall, I think it was December time, a report went to Cabinet around seeking a request to apply for TACP funding, and I think obviously when the saving was set, I think the hope had been at that point that we would have been applying for TACP funding in the last financial year, and therefore some of the activity around that would have been accelerated much earlier in the year. For a number of reasons, we weren't able to apply at the end of last year, and therefore we've had to wait until the TACP funding window has opened in the current year. In sort of December, January, I know certainly I attended a meeting with Welsh Government to talk to them about TACP funding, and at that point in time, they were hopeful that the window would open quite soon. In reality, it's only just opened, and therefore I think there's been a delay, therefore, in our ability to implement that and therefore implement those savings. So I think at this stage, I'm being a little cautious around will any of that saving be achieved, because I don't quite know the pace at which some of the work we're doing with the RSLs, that we're doing ourselves, etc., will bring houses into use by the end of this financial year. Also, I think that the demand for housing is also still on the rise, and therefore, irregardless almost of whether we achieve the saving, because because we're able to have done the activity we thought, there is anyway still upward pressure on that budget. So I think between those two positions, the fact we were unable to apply for TACP until now, and because of the upward pressure, that's why I think the service is predicting that they won't be able to achieve that saving in year. But as I say, on the positive, I think the savings will come through into next year. It's just probably they won't be achieved in the in-year position.
Thank you, Amanda. Councillor Andrew online next, please.
Thanks, Cheryl. I can trust you hear me okay?
Can indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amanda, for the report, and thank you for the rest of the members for their contribution. I can agree with all that. Thanks to especially to Gareth. This is probably the most important report that we'll consider all year, or the revenue and so on and so forth. I would be asking surely that it should come, and I know it turns 3 in quarters, but it should come to us nearly as a review, maybe every 1 month or 2 months, so we can really keep on top of this. I'd like to think that we could actually dedicate somebody in a full-time role to make sure that the budgets and all the money that we spend, or trying to save, or looking at reserves, that somebody can actually prompt departments to be able to carry out these things. It is something that needs a full-time person to look at it. I'm sure Amanda does look at it, but there's lots of things Amanda has to do at the same time. And I thank her very much for the reserve report, and that the reserve report is definitely going in the right direction. Fantastic news, that one. And I'm not going to worry about section 114, not while we've got reserves. And just lastly, for any local people from Abergele watching, or the press, I just want to counter some of Councillor Paul's mentions. He mentioned about the schools. Well, we can't do anything about the schools. That's Welsh Government. It's Band B. About the roads in Abergele, we can't do anything. That's Welsh Government, Paul. We can't do anything about the toilet because that's got 20 snags outstanding in Abergele. The £150,000 that you mentioned was the toilet that was refurbished. Was not. It was all 3 toilets refurbished. And the school building, which is old and is almost certainly going to close, costs £33,000 to run it. We get £11,000 income, and we've got a backlog maintenance of about £500,000. So that's just for the press. Okay. The last figure I'll give him is that we originally were told by Conway that the toilets would cost 15 grand a year to run. Now we think it's nearly 60,000. So these are what local people would like to know. And I'm sorry to sort of take too much of your time, Chair, for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrew. I think those sorts of things we could probably take outside of the meeting, maybe a meeting with Amanda and Mike and yourself and Councillor Paul. That'd be really helpful.
No, I totally agree with you on there, Cheryl. But what I would say is that there's press and the public watching this, and it's only fair that they do get to know the full story. Thank you.
Thank you. Reen, did you want to come in before? Sorry, on my little list there.
I should probably just move to the seat tonight, really.
I think so.
Yeah, on that point, I agree with the chair around really those are pretty specific operational issues that should be discussed and are being discussed. I am aware that they are being discussed. So we should concentrate on the report before us, really. Just a couple of quick points. Really grateful for the contributions. Actually, I think they're very helpful. On the pause and delay, yes, it is early in the year, but I guess we would be very much criticised if we weren't on top of it, and I think that's the point here. We've learned a lot from last year, and because of that, we're in a position where we do analyse and we bring this forward, and with that instruction, having thought about it for a considerable amount of time. So I get, in the usual run of things, you would wait and see how things transpire over a longer period. But the position we're in, we know we have outside influences on our budgets, which won't go away. So we are aware of that. And also the point I wanted to make is, yes, it's a very serious issue for us here in Conwy, but it's also an issue for every single local authority out there at the moment. These outside influences are influencing all budget lines across all public sectors. So we're not unique. And certainly the position last year where certain public authorities were able to put reserves into their budgets to balance, probably that's an even more complicated situation this year for those organisations, because they need to find that gap as well. So the decisions we made last year and not utilising the reserve position does help us in that respect. And we saw how the outturn position from December to the end of year, we were managed to curtail that spend, has put us in a position where we do have additional reserves. And that was really partly certainly to do with the pause position that was put in November. And we think we need to understand that it was in November last year that we were in a position to do that. So it's not good news at all. And I wouldn't, like to say that being in the pack of a number of local authorities in the position is not where I want to be. Certainly, we want a vibrant local authorities across Wales. But it is a fact that we've seen press reports about other public services that are struggling with all the pressures that Amanda has outlined, Mike have outlined this morning. So I think that's worth noting as well. It's not just a Conwy position, it's a national position.
Thank you very much, Reen. We're going to go, Councillor Mike next.
Just quickly, and good timing actually, because what the chief is saying there about the pause and review, I remember when we looked at it late last year, ERF, for example, said you've come to us too late. A lot of our activities have been completed and a lot of spend has been spent. So I think we should look at that and listen to our services. What I will say, I think reporting back to democracy, Harry, yeah, I think absolutely right. I'm happy to do that. And then the other thing, TACP, we were late or we didn't submit last year, but I'm led to believe last week we put in a bid for £2 million. In excess of £2 million. We've already approached Welsh Government for that funding. But I have to say as well, and I'm on record, I don't know if you remember last budget setting, I pulled a note out of my pocket and I said, one of the biggest issues about getting more housing, what have you, is probably members. And I think it's fair to say that some members are holding up the process, but as regards releasing some of the assets, we are ready to go on some of the problems that will give some of our residents a home to live in. And I think we need to rely on that. £95 a night we're paying for bed and breakfast for a single person. Don't forget, it's not just that, Chair. If this family's got a pet, you know, we have to put the pet in a kennel, or we have to put the cat in a cattery. Their furniture we have to put in storage, and I think we really need to get a grip of this. So I really hope Welsh Government look at our bid, and I hope we're successful to go forward with it.
Thank you, Councillor Mike. Councillor Paul, the very briefest response, please, and then we're going to Councillor David in the room, Councillor Chris, and then Nigel online.
Yeah, it's only reasonable when we're talking about the communication strategy that I respond to my mate Andrew's views, because I am all over the fine detail of this, and I'm sure our communications department will give the press and the public this detail if they request it. There's no dispute that the old school and
clarification.
the old school and head teachers building, the figures for everybody to see. As Andrew was said about the revenue costs, that's correct. There was also 160k that had to be spent in the next 12 months on repairs, maintenance, and 1.5 million in a consultant's report going forward. So it was a no-brainer to close that particular building. Now, on the other issue of the 150k and the free public convenience, it is a scandal that we didn't move more quickly on this, because the whole intention of spending the 150k was to make revenue savings in previous financial years. And there are, 20 nagging.
Councillor Paul, just to confirm that you're only supposed to speak on the one occasion and only then for clarification thereafter.
Yeah, but there's been further information brought.
So
and there's one other piece of information, two other pieces of information that have been shared, which I think we do need to address. On the grant, I assume that outstanding grant was the money Welsh Government still owes us for the 2 sound mitigation fences that I know Emily's still pursuing with the minister, getting for the Back Bangor Lane site.
We're going to go down the
no, but that's 500k that we still haven't resolved, because I don't know where that then is in the budget. And also the TACP, we were clear at the first project board meeting that we weren't going to make those savings, because Blevin, in outlining where we were up to on the schemes, it was obvious that we weren't going to make those savings in this year.
We'll get clarity outside of the meeting. So thank you for that, Councillor Paul. We now go to Councillor David in the room, and then Councillors Chris and Nigel online, and then if everyone marshals their recommendations. Thank you, Councillor David.
Thank you, Chair. I think obviously times are difficult and we do need to prioritise. But I think what we should bear in mind, we need to get value for money and we need to protect the vulnerable. My opinion is that we're failing on both of those. The increase in the school transport costs, yet again, a 1.2 million increase. That's 2% in council tax. It went up 800,000 above budget last year, now 1.2. Even if it's only 1.2 million next year over 5 years, that's at the very least 10% on council tax just to pay for that. And a lot of these services are not statutory services we don't have to provide. It's nice to pay for 17, 18, 19 year olds to go to college and to pay the cost for them. But that is going to impact on the rest of the budget. I mean, I must mention, because it's not been mentioned so far, the increase in the care line costs, 70% increase in care line costs for the most vulnerable. This should not be happening. I know both the local members of the Senate are both totally opposed to it. And I think the older persons commissioner for Wales needs to be involved as well. I did actually send an email to the cabinet members who's not replied so far to that. But I think this is very important. On the other services that we're cutting, the community centres, we're having visits to community centres, you know, basically saying we're going to increase your costs, which will make them not viable. But they came to my local community centre and there's 3 of them. 3 council officers came, and you know, you couldn't make it up, could you? And this is supposed to be saving money, but we've got the resources to send 3 people, you know. And then again, members in my ward are also getting letters. Older people, 2 people in the 90s, and I've been getting letters saying that they're going to be fined because they're not recycling enough. And there's a 73-year-old lady that, and she showed me, does all the recycling. And she got one of these letters. All these ways of getting, we're just not really protecting vulnerable people and protecting older people. And these are my concerns. And really, we're here to deliver services. And if people had the choice to pay for services elsewhere and didn't have to pay them to Conway Council, how many would take up the Conway Council services? We're just not delivering the services. And I would like to ask one question to social services about the care line, that there are people who we have a statutory duty to provide care for that we're not providing care for because we haven't got the carers to do it. And those people have got care lines. Now, are we going to take their care line away? Are we going to increase it so it's not affordable for them? I would like to ask that question as well. Thank you.
Do you want to ask it to the cabinet members as opposed to the officers, Councillor David?
Just like Jenny or Kat to answer about the care line, that there's people that we currently, because we haven't got the staff, can't provide services for, that have care line. I mean, they could be in danger if that's the only link they've got. You know, so I was asking that question to the social services officers.
Given the risk assessments and everything to our social care do, I'm sure they would not put anyone in danger at all. But Jenny, if you wanted to.
So in respect of the actual budget reduction that you're discussing, of course, we recognise fully, and we'd said in our equality impact assessment for the budget that it would harm the most vulnerable. We're in a difficult position, aren't we? We, as a service, you look to us to provide those savings. So we have to look at a whole range of areas, and there'll be more to come. In respect of trying to make it unaffordable, of course, we don't want to do that. And certainly we have a range of support measures we can put in place for people who are struggling. And it is a very valued service. I can only apologise that it's affecting the most vulnerable. It's certainly not an approach that we've taken lightly at all. So, but it's a sort of a budget reduction that's come forward, and we're implementing, to be honest, a little late, which is why you're seeing a pressure in the social care budget line. We put a full year saving forward, so we have eased some of that implementation, but I can only agree that it is really difficult, but it's not our intention to put people at risk. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Thank you. We'll now go to, we've got 2 more speakers online, then I'm going to ask for your recommendations, please. Councillor Chris next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to say, this isn't the first time officers have reported overspends to us. It has happened several times in the last 6 years, and it's how we respond to that that's important, and how we deal with that. I think there's, one of the concerns I do have, it's within the, and I know we're not going to go into the peer review in detail. I know that's coming in October, but the peer review does highlight the facility that's available within the new finance system to monitor spends as an ongoing situation, and that perhaps there is a training issue in terms of staff understanding the full range of abilities of that package, so that we do get reports as soon as possible. And I think I don't necessarily agree with Councillor Andrews' suggestion that we should be getting reports on a monthly basis. I think it would make our agendas hugely difficult to deal with, especially as officers have to produce reports every month. But I do think that when there is an exception, and that should be easier to spot, then that should be coming to us as a scrutiny. But the overspends, then they're in areas which we constantly have overspends. We've had overspends in social services before. We've had overspends in homelessness many times over the last 6 years. And as Councillor David said, we do overspend on home to school transport, and that has happened. But there has been members within this council who've raised these points many times, and it's how we respond to them. That the peer review tells us things that we highlights a number of things. It was quite underwhelming, as has been mentioned before, but it told us a lot of what we know is wrong with the authority. But when are we actually going to get round to addressing these issues and resolving them on a more structured basis? And I think that's really important and really key to raise. But I would like to know whether I know there's a report coming to the scrutiny committee in October on the peer review, but I would like to know what opportunity there might be for members to become involved in the work around developing an action plan or anything like that, perhaps outside of this committee, in perhaps a workshop or something, because I think it's important we all understand how this system is going to work, how the ideas are going to work, and I don't think we get that in a 20-minute, half an hour debate in the scrutiny committee. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that interesting point, Councillor Chris. I think Councillor Julie wanted to answer on behalf of the Cabinet to that.
Actually, Chair, it wasn't specifically on this point. It was just to come in when Nigel's finished. More on school transport and
okay. If you want to come in after that, then that would be great. Thank you. Charlie, did you want to respond, please, on Councillor Chris's points about the input to the peer review? Thank you.
We've been working hard behind the scenes as a cabinet and with senior officers to look at a response. I would really stress the fact that we invited the peer review in because there's a number of decision-making processes that we go through, which I think need to be far more agile. People have addressed a few issues with the budget in terms of our decision-making. We will bring that report with some recommendations for scrutiny. I would suggest if scrutiny aren't happy with the recommendations, then we'd explore other ways that we could work to come to consensus, Cheryl, because clearly this will only work if we've got a majority of members who are supportive of what we're trying to bring forward. But I would ask for members' patience, wait for the report to come and see what the suggestions are. Yeah.
Thank you, Charlie. Councillor Chris, are you content with that response?
Well, I'll wait till the report comes, but
okay.
I think it just delays it if members do feel that it doesn't meet meet what we need to be doing.
Okay, thank you. It's coming in October, Councillor Chris. So only two. Yes, two more scrutinies, a bit like two more sleeps. Okay, thank you. Now, Councillor Nigel, while everyone thinks their recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I think last year, when Councillor Mike and Amanda asked us to look at reviewing our spending as our financial position unveiled itself, that was right and prudent. We had to set a budget where we were unaware of the external pressures that we were going to find ourselves in. And I think the budget was set correctly at that time. Even my household budget has been affected by the external pressures. And I'm sure every councillor online or in the chamber today, their home budgets have been affected. And I think it's right and prudent now that Councillor Michael and Amanda are asking us to look and pause and review our work programmes to try and bring some savings for the next financial year and maybe for the end of this year. I do have a question for Amanda, is that a lot of our processes and works that we do on behalf of the people of Conway involve funding from external, maybe government or external places. If we pause or delay any work, are we in danger of losing those funding streams? That's my question.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nigel. Yes, we could be in that sense, and therefore I wouldn't be suggesting that we pause activity that directly attracts grant income, unless, of course, we were of the view that we no longer wanted to attract that grant income for whatever reason. But I think as you say, across the authority we attract extensive grant income, and I think for some of our services it provides critical funding to often I know in social care, for instance, an awful lot of the grant funding is directed into prevention work, which is obviously critical in terms of services, and actually of us avoiding those very even more high cost incidents when effectively things happen to people because it's not been prevented in the first place. So absolutely we wouldn't want to do anything to jeopardize external funding, and certainly we wouldn't be advising anything in terms of pausing spend in relation to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. One other comment I want to make is in a recent conversation with a fellow, well, not a fellow county councillor, but a county councillor from a neighbouring authority, as Shreen already mentioned, they're all in the same boat as what we are, but I don't think they're taking the early action that Councillor Mike and Amanda are asking us to do. So in that case, I would like to propose the recommendations as they are in full. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Nigel. Before we move to going to Councillor Anne and Councillor Gareth for their recommendations, just a quick question for me, Amanda, regarding Appendix 1, question point 6 and point 5. We're moving corporate information and customer service budgets over to ERF. What's the financial and service benefits implications? Is this a purely accounting? Is this purely an accounting issue?
I'm going to chuck a hospital pass behind me to Ewan, who I think hopefully will know the detailed answer to that.
Excellent, thank you, Ewan.
Hi, Ewan Atherton, Principal Accountant, Corporate Finance. Yes, I think the budgets concerned relate to the reception and the management of Adnoddau. I think they're moving to be under ERF. They were currently under Law and Governance, but they're all moving to be managed by ERF. Right. I think that's all that's happening.
So it's just pure accounting.
Yeah.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've had a proposal from Councillor Nigel. We're going to hear the other proposals, and I'll go for seconders. So, Councillor Anne, if you could come forward.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. In terms of Councillor Nigel proposing the recommendations that are there, I would like to actually just beef up 2 point, I think is it 2.3, the one that talks about slow and pause. I know Amanda feels perhaps she doesn't want to be alarmist, but I actually think we need to pick up the comms and message here and be really strong both to our services and indeed to be clear with the public. I think we should consider stopping all but essential spend as opposed to the probably less sort of focused role of slow and pause. Obviously there'd be discretion at SLT level so that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. That's ingrained within that. So I just think we need to be firm at this stage, because as I mentioned earlier, although this is a Q1 report, we're 2/3 of the way through Q2 practically, and therefore we don't know spend that's committed and therefore how worsened the 5.5 overspend potentially will be. So stop all but essential spend with discretion SLT level is a recommendation that I would like to make. Another recommendation I'd like to make, and this won't help us this year, but it will help us potentially next year, is that we adopt the school's budget model so that services are focused on delivery to the savings that they've budgeted and committed to. Schools don't have any option because their budget is reduced by whatever percentage we have decided they need to save. I think that's the real clear, strong message that we need to send to the rest of our services. And obviously we look at it end of year and look at it in a corporate sort of picture. So I think that real clarity of message, again, picking up what the peer review people actually said and be really clear. I think a third recommendation I would like to make, and I'm sorry if this sounds a bit operational, but we've got finance officers and business managers in each of our services. And I think I would actually ask us to look at what sort of challenge do we put on them and what authority do we give them to ensure that before they sign off with their services on their spends or their savings, that they actually know that they have the authority to ensure that what they're putting into plans is actually reasonable and deliverable. And then the final recommendation, and I'm sorry it's so many, but I think the peer review said we need to act and we need to act at pace. I actually agree with whoever said every scrutiny meeting that we have that has a budgetary focus, there ought to be a budgetary agenda item, however small, however detailed, so that month by month we're actually overviewing and scrutinising those particular services. It's very difficult if it's just purely left to finance and resources to look at everything in absolute detail. And I think if we've got a whole member approach, I think that would help us on the journey we've got ahead of us, because it's by no means going to be easy. So those are my recommendations, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Anne. And we'll now take Councillor Gareth's recommendations. This is going to be epic, isn't it?
Yeah, I've just got a couple of recommendations, really. One is to picking up on what Amanda was saying about each department being different and their priorities being different. So I'd actually like to see in 2.3 that there's added to that is that each cabinet member should give us a short report on how that is going to be implemented and what effect that will have in their departments. And I do mean short. I don't mean go into the fine detail or anything, but just how it's actually going to be implemented in their department. And a similar thing when it comes to the recruitment drag, that each cabinet member confirms that there's a specific plan within their department and that impact assessments have been made on the recruitment drag, that it doesn't, to the best of their knowledge, doesn't adversely affect the sickness and well-being of the staff. And a new recommendation I'd like to put in there, because the grant side of things does make me quite nervous of spending money and then hoping we get a grant. And I look at things like the forward work programme when we're talking about buying the property in Llanrwst and renovating it with grant. I'm wondering then are we actually going to buy it and then hope to get a grant and hope to get a grant to renovate it? Because, that's a different scenario. So I'd like to actually see a report of where we are proposing to spend money in the hope of getting some grants, so that we can actually make some informed decisions of whether that is a risk worth taking, how much they are. And also it'll stop me questioning everything that comes up and mentions grants of, has it been agreed? Has it been sorted? Or are you doing that on spec? And the final thing, I just like to reinforce to Councillor Ann's comments of that I think we should adopt the 3-year budgets for the schools as soon as possible, as I think she was recommending as came through the peer review. That's a sensible thing to bring it in ASAP.
Thank you, Councillor Gareth. So can we incorporate, Councillor Nigel, are you happy if we incorporate these extra points into your proposal? If we add Councillor Ann's points and strengthen with and add Councillor Gareth's?
No, I don't think I am. And the reasons are, I think Councillor Mike and Amanda have proven their mettle certainly over the last 12 months. Been very proactive and worked diligently and hard on our finances. I think bringing additional reports or not reports, but just for information from cabinet members doesn't bring value. Extends our committee meetings and undoubtedly will cost even more money. So no, I'll stick with my original proposal, which are the recommendations as they are in the report on page 70. That's 2, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4. I think Amanda and Michael have more than enough between them to know what are the important things for the people of our county, and I'm quite happy to stick with the original recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Nigel. Ring, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, first of all, we probably need a seconder for the original proposal, but I think we just need to be a little bit careful that we're just trampling into areas that actually are not within part of this report. There are certain things which will come through the peer review report, so you might want to think about just waiting and seeing the action plan on that one, because I think that will give you a direction with certain things. You know, we've mentioned some of the things around education and so on. That will probably form part of an action plan there. Also, I think we need to be careful about these monthly reports, in that actually one thing, we've got a new ledger coming in and we need to see how that works. That might give us sort of some different approach to monitoring. But actually, you need to bear in mind that it is the obligation of the heads of service, the directors, me, but also the cabinet members to look at these things monthly and then report to you on patterns. If you come too often, you won't see the pattern. So I think there's a risk there that you're giving yourself a lot of work to look at numbers monthly where things might go up and down. So that's the whole purpose of a quarter outturn, is that it gives you a pattern. Then you get a 6 month, the 6 months gives you another pattern. So I think we need to be careful here about what is your role and the time that you've got as a committee to look at these things. You must rely on your officers to look and engage and keep an eye on the budget. That's part of our role and responsibility, and report back here in the way that we have been in good time so that you can make changes if need be. So I just make those points at the moment, just for you to consider. But initially we need a seconder, and then I think we're going to have to go work through these as amendments to the original proposal.
Yes, Kerry's just going to, yes, Kerry's just going to talk us through that particular process now, given it this morning.
Yeah, apologies. Yeah, first of all, we need to deal with Councillor Nigel's original proposal. Then we had an amendment, obviously, to the original proposal, which came from Councillor Ann. So we're looking for a seconder for Councillor Nigel for his original proposal. Is there a seconder for his proposal?
Councillor Nia, you're seconding?
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Have a second.
Can I just ask a question? If Nigel and Nia's proposal is defeated, does that mean there is no proposal for the amendments to go to?
We need a seconder for the amended proposals as well, so before they can go to the
No,
vote.
but my point is, my worry is because I'm sympathetic to both Councillor Ann and Councillor Gareth's amendments, but I am concerned that if Nigel's proposal
we'd go to the amendment, sorry, we'd go to the amendment first because the amendment is an amendment on the original proposal.
Okay,
So
so I just was
first of all-
understanding the
Yeah,
procedure.
sorry, first of all, sorry, it's me. I haven't explained it properly. So yeah, Councillor Nigel made a proposal. Then we need a seconder for that proposal. Then Councillor Anne is making an amendment to that proposal. If she makes an amendment to that proposal, then we need a seconder for that. And if we get a seconder for that, we would then go on vote on that particular issue. But
Lovely.
we've also got Councillor Gareth's proposal, who would also need a seconder for before we could take that to the vote.
That's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you for explaining that.
If
to
that
me.
helps.
No, that explains. Thank you.
I think it does. Well, could we have a seconder for Councillor Anne's proposal then, please? Councillor Paul, thank you.
Yeah, we should, sorry. I also need to point out we should only be debating one of the issues at once. So we're only debating the one proposal at once. So if we want to deal with Councillor Anne's proposal first and take that to the vote, and then we can see where that leaves us after that.
Councillor Gareth.
Afterwards, we need to deal with each in turn, which is why it's a little bit. That would be very helpful if Councillor Anne, sorry, Councillor Anne, would you like?
Councillor Anne, if you could clarify your proposal, that's been seconded by Councillor Paul, just make sure we get that right. And we're going to take a vote on that first.
Hang on. Okay, so my recommendation is that we stop all but essential spend with discretion at SLT level as appropriate. Secondly, that for next year, taking the learning, we adopt the school's budget model so that services are focused on delivery to savings that have been put forward. Third, that we refocus the roles of our finance and business managers so that they are really driving and delivering the numbers needed. And fourthly, that every scrutiny meeting has a budgetary agenda item for services which they are overviewing or scrutinising. And I just say that our new finance system should give live reports. So it's a matter of pressing a button, I think, to be able to sort of see some of this information. We've never had that before. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Anne. And you seconded Councillor Paul? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to take a vote on that first. Would everyone like to show in favour of Councillor Anne's proposal, please? Two online and 2 in the room, that's 4. And against, please. I've got 7 against. So Councillor Anne's amendment is lost.
Okay, now we turn to Councillor Gareth and whether there is Councillor Gareth, if you could confirm what your proposal is, and then we can, or amendment is, and then we can look as to whether there's a seconder for that proposal.
Yes, I'd just like to beef up 2.3, where we add in there that each cabinet member gives us a short written update on how they're going to implement the slow and pause expenditure policy within their department. In 2.4, that each cabinet member confirms that they've done an impact assessment on the recruitment drag within their department, and that to the best of their knowledge, it won't adversely affect staff well-being and sickness levels. And the new recommendation is that we get a report, and probably to limit it is that for expenditure of over £10,000, which is going to be supported by a grant application, that we get a report that if this money is going to be spent before the grant is authorised, that we get a report of all those instances that are in the budget. That's probably really badly worded there on that one. But
We absolutely get the gist of it.
Yeah.
Councillor Cass. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Harry?
Could I just very quickly ask for a tiny bit of clarification, which I think I am right with this, but I'm conscious Nigel's comments earlier. The update from cabinet members, that doesn't need to be a full committee report. That can be a written update, which then if members wanted to pursue items further, they could do. Is that right, Gary?
yeah, absolutely. That's why I said from the cabinet members rather than full detailed reports from Mike or Amanda, because they've got plenty to do. But it would just be handy for us, I think, that we're doing our duty by actually drilling down and being specific when we're following these recommendations. Thank you.
I'm
That's
happy
great,
to
Councillor.
second that amendment.
So that is seconded by Councillor Harry. So So we're going to take a vote on that now. Councillor Garrett's proposals, could you show on those, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, 4. Thank you very much. And those against? Is that 7? 7. So that is defeated, Councillor Gareth. So Councillor Nigel says, we go back.
We now revert back to Councillor Nigel's original proposal and ask for a vote on that.
Okay, can we all vote on Councillor Nigel's original proposal, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's 7 in total. Do we make it? Okay, so 9 in total. 9 online. And 3, 4 in the room. Yeah. And those against, please. Any abstentions? Councillor Gareth. So that is carried. Councillor Nigel's is carried. I propose a 5-minute comfort break now, and I mean 5 minutes before we go to the next report. Thank you very much, members.
Take off
Oh.
the screen, yeah.
Okay, lovely. And start the recordings. Are we okay?
Yeah, carry on.
Excellent. Hey members, thank you very much, everyone. You're all feeling better after that short break. Thank you, members. Oh, the power, that was great. Okay, item B, review of reserves and balances held at 31st March 2023, pages 82 to 117. This is going to be introduced by Councillor Mike and presented by Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, and the debate before, which was very useful. So I think Amanda talked about the reserves earlier, and this is now. I think we could go into more detail. Just quickly for Paul, economy in place, forward work programme, 27th of September. They'll be discussing PCs, so you can talk toilets there, Paul. So basically, as the 31st of March 23, council's usable reserves stood at just about 49,278,000. However, if we look at table 2 on page 87, you'll see that currently we can only use just under 11 million, which is the total reserve to assist us support our overall financial resilience. We're asking our heads of service, to review their earmarked reserves to confirm the purpose for which they're held and consider whether they can be released to support the overall position of the council. And we've just debated that for 2 hours, haven't we? Members today are also being asked to look at these earmarked reserves, to review them and to agree or not agree the purpose. Appendix 3 on page 115 gives you the earmarked reserves that are held by each service and for what they are to be used for. I think we also need to agree our reserves policy that has slightly changed from last year. We agree each year. And I think basically what we're looking at there is we're looking at our net budget, which is about £280 million. What we're looking for is that we should have some sort of resilience in our general fund of about 5%, which would be about 14 million. We can use earmarked reserves as well to bolster that. But if we're looking at 5%, that's in line with SIPFA's code of practice, and they sort of recommend that would be sort of healthy to have that type of reserve. If we include earmarked reserves with our general fund, I think it's under 4%, Amanda, off the top of my head. So it's about 3.9%, I think, off the top of my head. I know Amanda will go into that in more detail. So I think it's prudent that we have a policy that sort of really looks at our reserves, and we need to bolster them. It's not worth me saying, these reserves are for a rainy day, because we've been in a storm now for probably, certainly last year, we've been in these stormy waters. So I think it's not for the rainy day, because we're in persistent rain at the moment. We're also looking to release in this report just over 1 million from the service reserve to be added to the pay pressure reserve that we spoke about earlier. So I won't go into any more detail. I'll hand over to Amanda to go through the report in more detail, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mike. Thank you,
Amanda. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, so this report, I guess, looks to do a couple of things. It talks about or asks for you to adopt the reserves policy or the updated reserves policy, and also then to consider effectively the reserves and balances that we held at the end of the last financial year. So just to set a little bit of context, I've included in the appendices some of the sort of technical guidance that's available to local authorities about reserves and balances, and effectively that sets out guidance and what's considered to be good practice in terms of reserves. Effectively, it is the responsibility of the Chief Finance Officer, which obviously in Conwy is myself, to advise local authorities about the level of reserves that they should be holding, and why what they should be established for and used for, etc. And reserves clearly shouldn't be held without a clear purpose. So you'll recall, obviously, when we set the budget, part of the budget report, I provide that view around the adequacy of our reserves, and certainly, it has been of concern in the past, and certainly Audit Wales have raised concerns in the past about the level of reserves that have been held by Conwy, and essentially that they've been too low to support the resilience of the authority. Fortunately, in some ways, COVID and the pandemic was obviously a terrible time for all sorts of reasons, but actually, perversely, it was quite a good time for reserves and balances, because actually the authority managed to increase its levels of reserves and balances over that 2-year window, directly, I guess, as a result of increased government support and obviously less activity in some ways during that period. So the reserves we have now actually are in a more resilient and robust position than they were actually pre-pandemic. However, the challenges that we are now facing and the financial challenges that we're facing because of the drastic change in the economic volatility that we're now encountering, the world's encountering post-pandemic. So whilst we have more, times are significantly harder. As Mike's pointed out, Table 1 sets out what our reserves are at the end of this financial year compared to the last financial year. You'll actually see that our reserves have marginally increased, but the important point in relation to the previous report is that actually the reserves we have to support our revenue budget have decreased, and it's our capital reserves that have increased. But capital reserves have increased to support certain capital activity, and actually the main reason the capital reserve has increased is because we've had some advance monies from Welsh Government in relation to the coastal risk management programme, which is there to support that when the spend comes through. So our earmarked revenue reserves have actually decreased from 34.8 to 31.5, which was obviously as a result of that outturn position at the end of last year when our expenditure exceeded our income by around £3 million. I just want to point out actually in paragraph 3.14 that I reported in the outturn report that the reserves were actually a little bit different than they are now. And the reason for that change is that after I reported the outturn position to you, we identified an error to do with some treatment of VAT that actually therefore has reduced our balances slightly from that reported time. So just to confirm that to you. I'll also just mention in passing, while we're sort of in terms of this sort of general preamble about reserves, if you were to look at our financial statements, in addition to our usable reserves, the accounts actually include a load of other reserves, which are unusable reserves. And I think you can look at accounts and sort of look at the total reserves and think there are masses of them, but actually an awful lot of the reserves are what are called unusable reserves, and effectively they are technical accounting adjustments. So I won't go into the detail of them now, but just to, as I say, just to draw that to your attention in case you were to look at the accounts, because actually at the end of March 2023, our unusable reserves stood at £339 million. Now, if that was cash, obviously we wouldn't be quibbling about some of the issues we are today. But unfortunately, they're just technical accounting adjustments. Anyway, I guess the crux of this report today, though, is to highlight the reserves that we had at the end of the year, and I guess to pose a couple of questions really. All heads of service have come back to me and confirmed the reserves that the service reserves that they want to hold and the reasons that they want to hold them, and as Councillor Mike has pointed out, in that review, a number of services have effectively handed back some reserves to the centre, and they're detailed in column 5 of Appendix 3, and they are. I have added those. The other side of those, I've put them into the reserve for pay pressures, and obviously that's one of the recommendations for you to endorse that movement of those individual reserves that services have volunteered up back into the pay pressures reserve. The remaining reserves, though, in column 6 are the reserves that the services wish to retain, and they wish to retain them for the purposes set out in the report. Now, I guess the question is that it's not to say that the purposes for those reserves aren't absolutely valid. They may well be for important things, critical things, but in the context of our overall financial position, I guess 2 questions arise really. One is, whilst they may well be important, are they the absolute top priorities, and therefore could the funding be redirected to something of higher priority? And the second question is, even if valid, again, and I'm not disputing remotely that the desire to hold on to them is valid, but given our financial situation, do we need actually to hang fire and hold those for our general resilience? So it's open effectively for members to ask really or determine whether they think it might be appropriate, whether they're happy to support the reserves as they stand and for the purposes that they're set out, or whether in fact some of them could be brought back to the centre to either support our overall resilience and or support alternative priorities, for argument's sake, transformation, rather than being left where they are. There's also the case, I think, some are being held to mitigate specific service risks, and again, there is an argument about, well, do we carry that risk in the centre and therefore bring the reserve to the centre? So, really, in that sense, open to you members to consider really whether you endorse. The reserves as we hold them are the reserves. That doesn't change. They are the reserves we have. But it's do you endorse what they're being held for, or could they be held centrally to build resilience, etc.? So in that context, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Amanda. Members, questions, please. Councillor Paul, Councillor Gareth, I've got anyone online. Councillor Paul first. Councillor David.
Can I just ask one specific question? We're presently holding reserves of 3.9%, and the plan is to move to 5% within the next financial year. I don't expect you, Amanda, to tell us how much that would increase the council tax, but I am just acknowledging at this point, to meet that increase in reserve, there would need to be a council tax increase unless we get some sort of windfall, which we're highly unlikely to get. Is that right?
Yes, I suppose a couple of things. Yeah, sorry, I didn't actually address that point, so apologies. In terms of the move to 5%, so yeah, I think it has rightly been identified before by Councillor Gareth actually around the reserves and what's our ambition in terms of reserves. So last year we had a policy, but it didn't articulate expressly an ambition in terms of the level of reserves we should hold. So I've changed that and put that in this year. I think in terms of how we move towards holding that level of reserves, I think we need to consider our ambition in relation to that and whether it's feasible, and I'm not necessarily suggesting it is feasible to move to being able to hold 5% in a single year, especially given the significant financial challenges that we have. So I think we have to work on a roadmap, I guess, through to being able to hold that level of reserves over the medium term, maybe over sort of a 3-year window or something like that. I mean, I think in terms of how it's funded, then clearly, as you say, it's either if in setting next year's budget we are looking to build our reserves, then ultimately we've got to identify the cash for that. And the only way we identify the cash for that is by either increasing council tax or by further budget reductions. Obviously, the review of these reserves in one sense also provides you an opportunity, because as I say, to the extent that services are holding reserves for planned expenditure, a decision could be taken not to allow services to progress with that planned expenditure because it wasn't deemed a priority, but instead to redirect the money to be held centrally for resilience purposes.
Thank you very much.
Can I just, so can I come back on
Very
that?
quickly.
So in terms of the roadmap, when will we see a copy of the roadmap?
I would be looking to set that out. So effectively in your fourth of in next one, the 30th of August committee, we'll be bringing the budget planning framework, and the budget planning framework sets out the outlook for next year. At the moment, that doesn't take account of any ambition to gain reserve, to build reserves further. So I'll also be bringing a little bit later on a revised medium-term financial strategy over a 3-year window, and I would be looking to address it in that.
Thank you.
Because I don't think that's tight enough for me. I don't think that's tight enough. I mean, in the previous debate, my feeling was, and the message I've had for 15 months as a councillor now is, Paul, be patient, be accepting. And my feeling is that we haven't got a grip of some of these issues. And I know people are unhappy by me saying that. People in my own group are unhappy about me saying it. But that is my feeling. That is my feeling. And like today again, it's been suggested to us, we may need you to use some of these reserves to establish a transformation team, which I would support. We're desperate for a transformation strategy and team to get to grips with a whole lot of issues. But again, we're not deciding today to allocate reserves to that. We're having to wait to October. Be patient and accepting is the message to Paul and other councillors. And my worry is that to the outside world, it looks like we are not willing to take tough decisions and we just keep on kicking the can down the road. And that is the message that I get from residents. And I think we've got to have a specific about what the roadmap is to get to 5% reserves, which I don't disagree with. But I think we also need to move at pace on so many of these issues rather than them being further delayed, because that's what's needed.
Want to pop back in and answer that?
Yeah, I think in fairness, Councillor Paul, you have the opportunity today. I'm effectively saying to you, you can consider whether you want to hold the reserves that are being held across services for the purposes that they've set out in the appendix. You can either choose to support that, or you can choose to say that actually no, you don't support it, and the reserves should be brought back to the centre to support our resilience and or to support a transformation pot, as it were. So you have the opportunity today to do that. That's effectively what the recommendations are inviting you to do.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll come to the recommendations at the end then. Now, next speakers in the room, we've got Councillor Gareth next, and then we're going.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. I think going back to what the previous thing, yes, the reserves should be a fundamental part of that medium-term financial strategy. And we've got to be realistic in that, reserves are a little bit like our own savings. It takes a long time to build them up and we can spend them very, very quickly. So we need that medium-term plan, whether it takes 3 years, 5 years, or or longer, we need a plan and we need some steps along the way. My gut feeling is that as far as the reserves are concerned, they should be controlled centrally, so that they all come into that central pot and their conscious decisions are made as to when we actually spend them and how they're actually spent and prioritized. And that is to be done centrally. Specific question on within the report 3.14. It says there that the general fund, which is to my mind the most important fund, because that's our day-to-day money, the stuff that we can, the resilience has actually been reduced by 321,000 because of a correction in the hospitality related income. So, but there's nothing, I don't understand what that is. Is it an overspend? Is it a loss? Is it income not collected? Where did it happen? Was it Venue Cymru, Parc Eirias, an event? We're talking about £6,000 a week here, which pushes the telecare charges into, makes them look like small potatoes. So, I'm hoping it's just going to be a technicality and it's going to reappear somewhere else. But it's, it's a big sum of money to have been taken out of general reserves.
If I can answer that one, Councillor Gareth, what it is we identified after the year end that when I say after the year end, before we actually produced the financial statements, but after I'd reported the outturn position, we as a result of actually testing that we were doing as part of the implementation of the new financial ledger, it was identified that a VAT indicator within the sundry debtors system had not been corrected when there had been a change in the VAT rate on hospitality income. So just to go back a little bit, what happened during COVID was that they reduced the VAT rate on hospitality income from 20%. I'm not sure what the percentages were actually, from 20% to 10%, say. I might be quoting the wrong figures there. But anyway, that reduction that had been applied during COVID had run out effectively, and it had reverted back to 20%, but that hadn't been corrected in one of our systems. So we identified that as part of the testing of the new ledger, and obviously have immediately corrected it, and obviously entered into discussion with HMRC about the fact we've failed to pay over income tax, etc. correctly. So that's what it was. So basically it was income which we treated as income when in fact it was VAT. So we've had to do that correction and pay that over to the Inland Revenue. So it's a one-off correction, and the systems are now got the correct rates within them. So it was a one-off correction, and unfortunately we'd accounted for £300,000 of VAT as income. So we treated it as ours when in fact it belonged to the taxman. So we've had to give it to the taxman.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah. So thank God we spotted it before they spotted it, so to speak. So so that's a plus.
Yeah. Also, just to confirm for members' assurance on that, because we've obviously done a self-declaration on that to the Inland Revenue, and there was a danger that we could have been fined for that. Anyway, just to confirm that HMRC have confirmed that they don't plan to impose any penalties for us in relation to that. So that's good news. But,
as I said, it's over 6,000 a week. So did it not show up in that profits had shot up at the hospitality venues because we weren't charging the VAT onto it? Because again, you look at margins, you look at ratios and all those bits and pieces, and that all of a sudden, in a private business, your profit has shot up by £6,000 a week above what you'd expect. You'd be wondering, the buying must be good or whatever, or have we been undercharging people the VAT that they should have been charged more?
No, I can assure you that as far as the resident is concerned, as far as the people paying the charge, they have been paying the correct income. all along. It's just that the split between our income and VAT wasn't treated correctly as a short while. I think in terms of why it wasn't noticed, for want of a better phrase, within the monitoring of the service expenditure was probably because it sort of it was something that was imposed during COVID, when obviously hospitality income across all of our services, the theatre, etc., in particular, were very unpredictable and low, and therefore I think when activities started to go back up again, nobody's noticed it, because effectively the increase has been because obviously post COVID we're back to normal activity, and I think it probably wasn't then compared to 3 years ago pre-COVID, if you know what I mean. I absolutely accept it. It's an unfortunate error that was in place for a few months, but not acceptable. And obviously we've had discussions in finance about how we make sure that kind of error can't happen again, because obviously it's unfortunate, but thankfully it was spotted and it has now been corrected.
Right, thank you very much.
Yeah, hopefully it's a lesson learned and will actually help us
yeah.
Monitor those ratios from cost increases of goods and services and things like that, to make sure that we're getting the proper ratios, the percentages on and margins that we should be getting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. We've got in the room Councillors Harry and David, then Councillor Nigel online, then we're going to the recommendations. So focus minds, people. Councillor Harry.
Yeah, apologies. Thanks, Chair. I've got two questions. The first one I'll direct to Amanda. Now, I appreciate this is really, really small reserve, but I've noticed you've got a line in there under finance, council tax additional staffing, and it's to support additional staffing costs to cope with increases in workload due to council tax premiums. There is a further word, etc. on there, so I don't know if there's something that's perhaps been omitted. But I understood when we set the council tax premiums and considered the financial impact and the revenue from those, we took off the additional staffing requirement or potential staffing requirement from the amount of additional revenue. So why are we holding a reserve to cover something which certainly in my experience over the last 5-6 years has always been accounted for and budgeted through a council tax premium?
Thank you. You're absolutely correct in saying that the table in the premiums report has effectively showed a cost associated with the support for the staff support in the context of the additional work as a result of the premium. But so it was shown in that table to demonstrate the net benefit to the authority as a result of the premium in that context. However, there was no actual budget ever provided to the revenues and benefits team for that work. So consequently, although it was recognised in the table as a cost, the actual funding of it has always been from reserve. No additional funding was actually given in the budget.
Okay, and my second question or point, and perhaps as well as Amanda, this could well be picked up by Mike or his cabinet colleagues. I was looking through the service reserves, and one thing I found quite astonishing really was that economy and culture to me seem to have the largest service reserve, and even if we agreed for Farmant out, it will probably have the second largest service reserve. I mean, to put it into perspective, it dwarfs the service reserves in social care, and we think that economy and culture, in terms of our expenditure as an authority, is actually really quite a small service compared to education, social services, etc. I wondered whether or not that there'd be any merit, and I will leave this with Cabinet to consider, because I'm conscious Cabinet are discussing this tomorrow, and it's probably awfully technical to chuck in as a proposal at this stage. But whether there's any merit in actually capping the level of service reserves that individual services can hold. I mean, Mike previously mentioned about the difficult financial circumstances we found ourselves in last year. Yet last year, somehow, economy and culture managed to squirrel away more money into their reserves. Looking at this, it doesn't actually appear to be that difficult for them. Now, the reserves offering to return to the centre, that's very welcome. I'm sure no one would disagree with that. But I'm thinking in terms of using our reserves to support the council's financial resilience, is there not some merit in saying that individual services are capped at the level of service reserves they can hold, perhaps maybe as 5 or 10% of that service's total budget, because I appreciate different services will have different demands, and any surplus funds are held centrally to support this council's financial resilience. And I'm sure if individual services needed financial support, if they experienced overspends, that would come through a democratic process usually. That's just a thought. I get that's very technical. So I'd implore Cabinet and officers to maybe think about it if it's practical.
Thank you, Councillor Harry. Yes, I'm quite sure that the Cabinet members for social care would be, yeah, I'm quite sure the Cabinet members for social care would be really pleased for that when it comes to our looked after children are very extreme pressures over there. Thank you. Councillor Aaron, did you want to just come back in there briefly on that?
Yes, Amanda might want to add a little bit more, but lots of the reserves line that we have in economy and culture is actually grants that we're just holding to spend on buildings and things like that. So it's not that we've been squiddling away money over the last few years, it's just that we've been really successful with grants.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Aaron. Right, Councillor David in the room, Councillor Nigel online, then recommendations.
Thank you. Just some technical questions for Amanda about reserves and how reserves are accessed, because like I said, we've had this big projected increase in school transport, 1.2 million. Is it like a tap where they can just access it and turn the tap on and get the money, or as Mike was saying, is it pouring a glass of Chardonnay? Do they get access? I mean, when it's non-statutory services, and a lot of the school transport is non-statutory, isn't there a cap on it? Isn't there some way of actually saying, well, no, you can't spend this extra money? Because we've actually gone through democratic processes, we voted budgets and things, and then we get these massive overspends, and the money's just, the reserves just seem to be there to do it. Can we put caps on this and say, well, look, you can't, if it's non-statutory service, you can't go over? I mean, could we do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor David. Amanda?
I mean, we hold some reserves for specific purposes, and just in relation to home to school transport, we do have a home to school transport reserve of about 237,000, which is there, I guess, to assist with annual pressures, because obviously, you know, spend may go up and down in any year, and I think historically, you know, where there may have been underspends, that the reserve has been built up, and obviously then pressures against the reserves are then taken from the reserve. I mean, I think you know, I'm sure there are others here who can answer better than I can, and I know Councillor Julie wanted to come in earlier, but you know, I think at the end of the day, what we have got to recognise is we do have contractual obligations, and if we've got contractual obligations, we have no choice but to pay those contractual obligations. And whilst we may be providing non-statutory elements to that service, you know, equally we have an obligation to go through appropriate consultation in order to change the design of those services, and you know, I'm aware that education will be bringing a paper forward soon, which is looking at effectively how we start that process of consulting on those non-discretionary elements. So you know, I think it's not you know, whilst I get the sentiment, Councillor David, around can we not just turn the tap off, it would be fantastic if we could, wouldn't it? But unfortunately we have to comply with contractual obligations, and we have to comply with due process in terms of consultation.
Thank you.
Just add to that as well, in the previous report we've agreed to pause and a slowdown. So I think I think that'll put more scrutiny on the reserves and balances. If you're going to start, if we're pausing some of the activities, what are we spending the reserves on? So I think there'll be more, as I said, scrutiny on that going forward.
Lovely, thank you. Very briefly, Councillor David.
It's just the sheer size, 1.2 million overspend, a 20% of the actual budget increased. I mean, we must surely be able to put a cap on that. I mean, residents have had that large council tax increase, and they're having to live with that and living with the cost of living crisis. They can't just go and what's the word, the magic money tree and just get money. I think we've got to put some kind of limit. A 20% increase on that budget, and a lot of those services are non-statutory services. We must be able to do something about that, surely.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dave. Last word, Councillor Nigel, then we're going to have recommendations. Or are you going to make recommendations, Councillor Nigel?
I will be making a recommendation, Chair. Thank you very much, and thank you to Amanda and Mike. Another prudent move I suggest here, and I fully support. You know, again, you know, Amanda and Mike, they're proving to be the A team for me at the moment. So I'm going to move the recommendations as they are on page 83 through to 84, which is 2.2 to 2.8. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nigel. Councillor Dilwyn will second that. Okay. Thank you, Kerry, for keeping on the straight.
Chairman, before I make an amendment, can I just question Councillor Mike on something, please? Is that allowed?
1 minute. 1 minute. Sorry, Mike.
Do we need at this point to bring to the centre some reserves to ensure that we can, in this year, establish a transformation team?
In a nutshell, I think yes, but is it reserves? It could be a sale of an asset that perhaps we could use that money. But you know, I never got any shocks out of the peer review, and I'm not going to go into it. But I think yes, transformation. I think it was the word they were looking for from the very start. To be honest with you, Paul, that you know, and yet we had, you know, our Conway Opportunities Board, which I said to the peer reviewers, go and have a look at the minutes in there. You will see lots of words saying transformation. But I think, yeah, if we disposed of an asset, you could look at putting that money towards a transformation project. Yeah, reserves could be used for that, but really you want it on a spend to save. You want to see tangible results coming from it. Like what we're doing with homelessness, we need to buy the properties, turn them into homes where people can live in them, and take the pressure off that £95 a night per person that I said earlier. So in a nutshell, yes, Paul.
So is that a amendment, or are you going to propose that?
So would you welcome an amendment?
At this stage, I'd welcome boosting up the reserves. I think that's a job that we have to do. I think transformation, we need to have a discussion on what that looks like, and how it goes forward, and how it goes funded, how it's going to be funded. This report is looking at, you know, boosting up our reserves, in particular those that will give us better financial resilience. So at this stage, yes, I'd welcome a transformation programme board. But to answer it here, I think is really difficult for me, to be quite frank. But it certainly is something that we really need to take forward. So I mean, I'm happy with the recommendations in this report, Paul.
Right, but I'm going to add an amendment because I'm not feeling the right sense of urgency for me. And so I'd like to recommend that the Cabinet decide on a sum of money to be transferred from reserves to establish a politically led transformation team. I don't think we can delay this and kick it down the road any further.
So is anyone going to second Councillor Paul? Oh, Councillor Gareth. Yes, and then Councillor Chris on that.
Just like to tweak. I'm on board with what Councillor Paul was saying, but maybe just widen it that all reserves that aren't specifically allocated for capital or linked to grants are transferred to the centre, with a proportion of that to be allocated for the transformation team, so that everything. Sorry,
I'd suggest that is a separate amendment and not adding that. It's.
I remember.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's what we like. Okay, so do we have a seconder for that one? Yes, thank you. Councillor Chris, have you?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I did in the previous debate, I did start to allude to the peer review and start to make some comments, and the leader responded to ask us not to go down that route at that stage, but to delay until the October report when he brings a report forward. Whilst I'm supportive of what Councillor Paul is trying to do, I think there's on reflection, I think there is a number of things within the peer review that need to happen. One of them might be a transformation project, but in isolation, it isn't going to resolve the problems where we need to get to. So, I mean, I share Councillor Paul's concerns, but at the moment, on the basis of what the leader said before, I was willing to hold back until we get that report, although I would have preferred to have seen members getting some of it input into that report rather than it just being cabinet. Having said that, that I do feel that perhaps we should wait for that report, and then we can make an informed decision. We can look at what cabinet are suggesting that we do, which might be over and above what Councillor Paul is actually suggesting today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Chris. So we'll take the amendment first. We've had the amendment, it's been proposed and seconded. So please, can we vote on Councillor Garrett's amendment, please? All show 1, 2, 3, 4 in the room. 5, 6, that's 2 online. So that's 6. Could we have against, please? 1, 2, 3. Let's be, yeah, we've got councillors Chris, Nigel, Nia. Sorry, Councillor Anne hasn't got a hand up. I wasn't sure. John, oh, there's Councillor John, right.
And Frank.
So 7.
Chair, I had my hand up to support Gareth.
Yes, we got. Yes, thank you. So that was 5. Yes. Okay, so that's defeated. That motion is defeated. And that. Yeah, so we now go back to Councillor Nigel's, the original amendment that's been proposed and seconded. Councillor Nigel's original proposal. If we could vote Joe on that, please. Those 4. 10, 11, 11, 11, 4, and those against. Any abstentions? No, that's carried. Okay, thank you very much for that, members. Now, we now move on to item 10, exempt item. Could we have a proposer and a seconder to go into committee? Please, Councillor Dillwyn is proposed. A seconder, please. JR. Councillor John has seconded. Could members show in favour, please? That's carried. Thank you, members. Okay, if we could just wait for